So let's give... Was that the intro?
Dan, a big
Dan! I'm going to try and use this because I pace when I talk. I was so tempted to actually just throw away everything I was going to talk about because of listening to the talks this morning, which were all fantastic and just made my mind kind of spin off in other directions. But instead of doing that, what I did was delete a bunch of stuff to shorten things up because I've got oh, wow. This isn't giving me my presenter display. So instead of rewriting my entire talk, I just deleted a bunch of stuff that, so I have some time for a tangent. And then I added this. You don't know what this is. Does anyone know what this is? I doubt you do. I'm a big fan of physical artifacts, and everyone this morning has been talking about, no matter what their topics, everything related to the physical world in a real nice way. And everyone was talking about physical things, which is appropriate for a conference called Material. This is a picture, so you can all see, of this. Does anyone still know what it is? Yes? No? Any printers in the audience? Anyone who's been printing? Couple people? Okay, so what this is, it's a fascinating thing. It's just a card. It's a piece of card that will turn into some sort of greeting card. But this is something that would normally be thrown away. On Monday, I picked this up on Monday out of the bin in a room on a massive printer's floor in Massachusetts, a couple hours north of New York City. It's the oldest printing company in the United States, 217 years old this year, Crane & Co. And a friend of mine just took it over recently and wanted me to tour the printing facility. And there's this one room with these three lovely ladies who have all been working for decades. And they have these stacks of these cards. And have you ever seen a card with a thin border around the edge? Not like a color on the edge of it, but actually just a thin border on the edge. Well, at Crane & Co., they don't do that on a printer. They do that with these women who sit in a room all day with stacks of cards, and they line them up in the most beautiful way that just, it looks like magic when they do it. They're just all stacked, so they have kind of a diamond shape, and you just see just as much of every card in the stack. That's the width of the border they're going to paint on, and then they have these brushes, these mohair brushes that they make, that they each make themselves, so they're all kind of slightly unique, and then they take these brushes, dip them in the inks, and then brush on the border by hand. And so the top card of that stack is this card. So what you see here are the brush strokes of as they're brushing all these borders on, the top card in the stack gets thrown away because it's not actually a border, it's just the run over, right? This is a throwaway artifact. And this is the tangent that I could use up all my 12 minutes on. But I think it relates a lot to what we're all talking about this idea. There are a lot of themes of reuse or just accidental discovery when we're working with materials. And I know that's one of the kind of ideas that Brian and Yoshi had when they came up with this, was that, what if we treated the web like a material, like a physical material? There are all these things that happen with physical materials that are really unexpected, and yet this thing is still a thing. I turned to my buddy Paul after I found this, and I said, you've got tons of really, really cool stuff on this shop floor, these old practices that you'll never sell, that just get thrown away, but are actually somehow these beautiful objects in and of themselves, these beautiful accidents, throwaway objects as artifacts of the process. And I'm just going to throw that tangent out to you to sit with you before I go on to the rest of what I'm going to try and squeeze in, because I think it's a wonderful thing to remember that throughout all of our processes, all of the materials that we work with, whether they're physical or digital, there's a lot of throwaway. There's a lot of stuff that doesn't get used. In digital, a lot of the time, it might even get deleted, which is kind of scary, but because we can't get it back as easily. There's a lot of cruft, basically, but I think there's a lot of beauty in that cruft. Like when you the off runs, everything that's left on the cutting room floor, right? There's a lot of potential in all of that, and especially in this kind of stuff that Dewi was talking about, and I know the stuff that he's working on because I'm working with him on a few things. There's a lot of discussion around what we do with waste and actually how we approach zero waste, and rather than looking at things as wastage, seeing what we can do with them. And there are a lot of industries that are doing things with that. I'm really curious where that might lead in a digital sense, because we don't have physical waste, but there's still a lot of waste, right? Anyway, that's a tangent for you to think about that I just couldn't stop thinking about this morning, and I had this card in my bag, so there we go. So it's kind of going to lead into some of the stuff I'm talking about. 10 minutes and 30 seconds. Okay, good. I've got 56 slides. Bear with me. So So one of the things that's been on my mind a lot lately, especially the last few years, but I think my entire life, is how much overlap, how much portable knowledge we all have that is kind of waste. It's like knowledge waste in a way. A lot of people get in these tracks where we're all interested in a lot of different things, but we only tend to do one of them or two of them. And all of these things that make up who we are, they're all who we are, but when we extract what we do, we tend to only pull out one thing or two things. And I mean, again, another theme this morning is that a lot of the people, well, everyone speaking is in an overlap, like bridging a gap between one thing they do and another thing they do, or one interest and another interest, which I love, because that's what I think we should all do. My history it involves the web and physical things, and that's one gap. But one of the things I've been doing the last few years is kind of looking at all of my interests and all of those overlaps and trying to figure out where my waste is, what I'm not pulling into everything else that I'm doing that I could be. What things could I be exploring more? So across like these years, for instance, I was doing a lot of web stuff. I was working with these folks as clients, with the consultancy that I ran. I blogged, which people used to do apparently. I should get back into it. I did design work, a lot of digital design. I started out in print, co-authored a couple of books that were actually ended up being code heavy, not design heavy. I was doing all sorts of things. Then I decided I wanted to get back into print and started chatting with moo.com. Anyone have Moo business cards? Yay. Notice I didn't raise my hands because I never have business cards with me anymore. But I was their creative director between 2011 and 2012. And maybe I got bored of business cards. Who knows? So I've come through this interesting arc, which was print to digital and code, like design, print, into code, design for code, and then back into a lot of hybrid stuff with Moo. And then I made it, so there was already a lot of overlap there, but then I made an interesting transition that we have to back up a few years to get into. So in 2008, one of my friends, Jason Santamaria, fantastic designer, blogged about this. This is also his blog from back then, which I love because that still looks super modern, and it looked really modern back then. He was doing this experiment with doing art-directed blog posts, and I still think they look wonderful. And he blogged about this SX70, this Polaroid SX70. Now, I was not a photographer. I did loads of other visual things, and I did music, and I did a bunch of other things. But I'd never tried photography. I thought that was for wizards. And I saw this, and I thought it was the most beautiful object, like product I'd ever seen. And I had to have one. And also, it coincided with Polaroid discontinuing their film, and I thought, okay, well, I got to shoot a couple of packs of it before it goes away, and then I can tell my grandkids that I did, and then it'll look great on the shelf. So I bought this thing, and to my surprise, it did exactly what the designer Edward Land intended it to do, which is introduce me to photography, and took photography from being something I thought was for smarter people, because I'd had friends and girlfriends who were like fantastic photographers, and I just had no idea how they did that, because I would pick up like a point-and-shoot camera, and it would look shit. And then I picked up this thing, and right away, like these are some of the first pictures that I took with it, both in the States and in the UK, and I just loved the output. And as a designer, I needed to unpack why, and I won't go into that tangent because I've only got 6 minutes and 55 seconds left. But I needed to figure out why, so I threw myself at photography as a design problem. I needed to find out why all the other cameras that I'd used up until that point hadn't made me feel like a photographer, and this thing, which was older than I was, did instantly. No pun intended, but it works. So then in 2010, so just a few years after I kind of picked up this camera and then a lot of other cameras, I was still fully doing design. This is just before, a year or so before I started at Moo as well. A friend of mine asked me got me an invite to beta test a new app that hadn't been released yet that was around photography. Any guesses on what it is? Yeah, okay. So about 2 or 3 months before it was released, I was one of the beta testers. And it's turned into this thing where, well, Instagram has turned into this crazy thing. But in the 8 years, it has been a way that I've been able to take an overlap of an interest and turn it into a line of work. So now my client list, which includes photography, I still do a lot of design work, but it's been an amazing kind of thing that's happened. And that transition, again, kind of got me thinking. Because that's only happened, the transition into it being work happened in the last 5 years. It was still kind of, ooh, Instagram, this is a fun thing, and I can do my hobby and whatever, share it with the world. And then I decided to push into photography as a commercial endeavor, and it worked. And it was really interesting because I started looking back on all the things I was interested in when I was a kid and trying to think of what other things might I be interested in that if I just throw myself at them and I ignore the common way of thinking, which is that once you get into a thing, you just have to work for many years at it so you can get better at it, and then you can become an expert at it, and then so on and so forth. And when we're young, we're interested in tons of things, right? Like when I was in my teens, I was in Scouts. I was doing design from when I was about 15, 16. I was loads of singing. That's totally another tangent, but it'll make sense. And I was a competitive swimmer. I did all sorts of stuff, right? Oh, and then the big circle. All these things kind of overlapped, right? And then the big overlap was girls, because I was in my teens. Right? Girls love singers. They don't really love Scouts, but anyway. Back to a point. The interesting thing is that when we're kids and even into our teens, that's normal. Have all these interests, and that was just a fraction of the interests. Those were the main ones. There were tons more that I was interested in, and then the idea of focus is introduced by adults. And this idea that to be a successful adult, we have to like throw away all these other things that we're interested in and end up kind of only doing one of them. And that's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to get on this track. I don't like that. It's a horrible kind of word, focus. It's a great word. It has a lot of different uses, but in this particular sense, it makes people ignore all the things they're interested in. They might actually be able to use in their work, whatever that work happens to be. So we end up forgetting about all of the possibilities that are in front of us. So a couple of years ago, I decided to actually run an experiment on myself, which I like doing. If I experiment on myself, I know exactly what's happening. It's kind of, I love reading stories about scientists injecting themselves with strange substances. Actually, I know this lady right up front here, Charlotte, has done an experiment. I won't mention it. I'll leave that to you. But we had a very interesting discussion at the speakers' dinner last night, and I approve because this is great. Because if we want to prove something to ourselves, the best way to do it is just to do it to ourselves. So this experiment was an experiment of exploring all of those different avenues of just things that I was interested in that if I thought about them just a little bit, I'd go, well, yeah, I could do that, but it would need too many years, it would need too much time, and I'm doing all this other stuff instead. And instead, I'd flip that on its head and go, how portable are the things I already know, and how can I use those things with the connections that I also have to do other things, to kind of stick my fingers into as many different pies as possible. So instead of thinking of those things as side projects, I decided to, again, flip that on its head and go, I'm going to treat what most people would treat as side projects as my main projects, and just kind of take a bit of a punt, reduce my budget as much as I possibly can, so reduce the risk, and treat it like this, income versus interest. So instead of worrying too much about whether a thing would make money, I'd measure how interested I was in that thing. Again, much like you do as a kid. Right? You go, ooh, I like that, and then you throw yourself at it. You don't worry about any of it, how much work it's going to take or anything else. So one of the first things that happened was kind of very natural, not much of a huge gap, but just over 2 years ago, my friend Craig Maude and I did a hike with another friend, 8 days on the Kimono Cotto in Japan. And he's a designer, I'm a designer, he's an avid photographer, I'm a photographer, and we decided, oh, well, let's do a thing with this. Let's actually do a thought experiment. We know that all these people around the world take pictures and go on trips and never do anything with them. We're both designers, we can do stuff. He's designed like loads of books in his life, I haven't, I wanted to. Let's make a book immediately out of this experience. Let's distill it into a physical artifact which like scratches all of our itches and allows us to like build a little bit of a case study about how complicated it might be to do. So we did. We immediately after the 8-day hike kind of camped out for 4 days in this 150-year-old house in Japan and printed out all our images and like curated everything and turned it into a book, put it on Kickstarter, and it worked. And we printed 1,000 copies and we've sold out of them at this point, and it was really cool. We won an AIGA cover design award in 2017 for it. Like it was this thing that we just kind of did really quickly and turned into a much bigger thing than we thought. Oh, I won't play you that. Well, maybe I will play you this. This is what it looks like when you're standing, you agree to sign and number 1,000 copies of a thing. Never agree to do that. I'm just going to skip past it because that was 4 days that we spent doing that. Then there's music. So I have a music background, but it's all a cappella. So I did like 20 plus years of singing, choral directing, and coaching, performing, all sorts of stuff. But I've never produced. I've never played an instrument. Always wanted to. Did some photography for a talented singer-songwriter in London a couple of years ago, beginning of 2017, and we were chatting as we were prepping for the shoot about just music. And when she found out my music background, she started using me as a sounding board. Well, through a random series of events, she ended up like breaking ties with her producer that she was working on for her first single, and we had a chat about it. And at the end of that chat, I was giving her just tons of ideas. I was like, oh, you should try this, you try this, try this. She leaves the chat and she goes, okay, I think I found my new producer. I went, okay, sure, because I'm in the middle of this experiment. I'm kind of going, yep, I'll do that. A lot of people reacted, oh, how can you do that? You've never done it before. I'm like, well, it's music, right? I'm working with talented musicians. She knows how to sing. I can help her with that. But the pianist knows how to play piano. I just have to tell him how to change how he's playing, how the emotion is coming through. The recording engineer knows what he's doing. I helped art direct the music video as well, which was cool. Like, there were a lot of portable skills that I got to apply here because it was I was working with really talented people. And this ended up being the kind of key for all of these experiments, was that work with talented people who do the things you don't, and then your portable skills become immediately applicable. You don't have to have that learning curve because you're learning as you're doing, because these other people already know the thing that they're doing. And anyone who's worked on teams with people who do the thing that you don't understands that this works, right? But we don't tend to apply it to things we've never done before nearly as much. And it was brilliant. We created tons of good stuff around this single, launched her first single earlier this year, and she's working on the other ones, and it's been fantastic stuff. I'm now in negative time, but I'm just going to breeze through these other ones. And some of these experiments have finished, some of them haven't. They're all involving in one way or another physical things, for physical objects and artifacts, because I think that's really interesting. They're still involving a lot of digital stuff, whether it's digital audio. Craig and I built a complete website to go along with Koyabound as well that acts as a guide for other people who want to hike the same route. But then things like this, camera straps. I wanted to make camera straps. I haven't worked with leather since I was in Scouts, but I met a really talented bag maker, and I just said, hey, we should make some bags and accessories at some point, because why not? And she said, yeah, cool. What do you have in mind? So we're actually nearly finished prototyping like camera straps, wrist straps, all sorts of things, using a couple of materials that people don't tend to use for straps, which is also cool. So we've accidentally come across a kind of unique thing in what would otherwise look like a crowded market, just because her experience is about fashion and bags, not straps or camera market, and my experience isn't in making any of those things. So I could just say, well, what kind of things do you have? I can ask all the dumb questions, basically, and I don't mind asking the dumb questions when I'm around someone who I trust knows a whole lot about what they're doing. And I've got a long list of people waiting for these things. A couple of camera brands have seen the prototypes and now want to like carry them. And it's really weird that happens, and that's all through, again, other connections. But I didn't need to learn how to work with leather. I needed to work with someone who knew how to work with leather. And then, any Hayat Denim fans in here? I know this is kind of the market. Only Dewi. Okay, great. It's not because you're Welsh, is it? The folks who run Hayat Denim, this kind of boutique denim jeans company in West Wales, also run the Do Lectures. Any of you heard of them? Yep, more nods. Okay, good. But they make these jeans that are wonderful. They do a lot of short runs. And a couple of years ago, I was chatting with David Hayat, the founder, about maybe collaborating on some things. He was actually talking about collaborating with other people, and I just said, hey, if you need any help connecting with interesting people, let me know. And then a year after that conversation, he came back to me, and I said, how's it going? He said, well, we haven't done any yet. Would you like to do the first one? So, of course, I said yes. And I went to Wales. I don't know anything about making clothing and fashion, but they do. They're experts. A lot of the people who make the jeans in their factory, and the designer as well, the designer who designs a lot of their jeans has been designing for as long as I've been alive, so he knows his shit. And I could go to him and just ask, again, all of the dumb questions. Well, can you do this? Can you do that? How do the denims work? Like, how does stitching work? What can we change? Can we change this? Oh, no? Okay, fine. That's fine. I could build a mental model really quickly by using their expertise to kind of fill all the gaps, and then feed into them with thinking that they wouldn't have, because I don't know any better. I don't know enough to ask to like hold back on an idea. And this has been a fantastic thing. So we're right near the final prototyping stage. These are actually like a previous prototype from last year. I wear these things all the time. It's amazing to actually be able to say, here's how they don't work for me normally, and here's how they don't work for other people. They're jeans for creative workers. So rather than a farm or a factory worker, which normal denim is kind of built around, especially good jeans. These are like the high degree of stretch. You'll understand a lot of this stuff. It's like almost 100% recovery, double black so that they won't turn gray even when you wash them. There's tons of stretch in them. They're super flexible so that if you're, say, on a photo shoot, on a set, something like that, you can do this, which you can't do in really good denim normally. And then you stand up and walk into a meeting and your knees aren't sagging, right? So not very complicated stuff, but it's been a chance to kind of flex some muscles and experiment with things. And I also get to do all the branding. I get to work with Avery Dennison's prototyping team on packaging. And this stuff is all going to be zero waste. So another thing, pulling that tangent back in, where I get to work with some fantastic people who know how to work with materials, and I get to set what the bar is for them. And I get to be kind of creative director, but also kind of help design it in a way and work with the team at Avery Dennison on creating something. This is one of the prototypes we're experimenting with, but we're using a lot of reusable materials, a lot of post-denim waste in the card. Everything is as good as we possibly can make it, and kind of above the level that we know is being done anywhere else in the fashion or packaging industry, even for the labeling and everything we're doing on the jeans themselves. So pulling that all together, these are examples of the things that have worked pretty well, and there are loads of other things that are underway, and they're all because I'm taking the stuff that I know and that I'm interested in, and finding other people who are experts in those things, but might not have the ideas that I have. And you know that you find that out pretty quickly. When you have a chat with someone, it either sparks their interest, your ideas spark their interest, or it doesn't. If it does, then bam, you've got a collaborator, and you can work on something with them. And so what I encourage you to think about as you leave here today, and with the rest of the talks as well, is about exploring all of these intersections between all the things you do, and not just the things you do, but the things that other people you know do. And a lot of this might be not the things you do for a living, but the things you were interested in when you were young. There's nothing should be off limits, and everything that that you're really passionate about and interested in that you can pull into the things you do will feed positively into whatever the output is from that. And you don't have to be worried about whether you know the outcome will be successful or not. If you treat it as an experiment, you'll just enjoy pulling on that thread and following that lead, and it will almost certainly lead to something way more interesting than you imagine. And that's where I'll leave it for you, and I'll hand it back to Brian. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dan. Do you want to set up?